down 3 planes.
8 missions you were lucky, 10 somebody up there liked you, 25 was almost an impossibility.
The plane blew up and I got knocked out.
Welcome to Air Combat Journal. Today's journal entry features World War II B-17 flight engineer and top turret gunner Omar Scheidt. Omar was shot down on his second mission and spent the duration of the war in a POW camp. He was liberated during a forced march away from the advancing Allies. This is your pilot, John Sermon, asking you to strap in and sit back. Air Combat Journal is ready for takeoff.
I was with the 490th Bomb Group, deployed for overseas in October of 1944. Of course, our objective is to deliver a plane to England, and so we started out at Ardmore, Oklahoma, and ended up as part of our trip at Virginia, had a layover there, and then finally Goose Bay, Labrador. And then our next flight was supposed to be Greenland, and we were very happy that we didn't have to land at Greenland because it has a terrible landing strip. And so we moved on to Iceland, Reykjavik, and spent a couple of days there. And I think I lost my dog tags there, so I didn't have any dog tags for the rest of the action. And then we went into Valley Wales, I believe, where we dropped the plane, and then finally ended up at Airfield.
Since you ferried a brand new B-17 to England, were you expecting that this would be your aircraft for your tour?
No, we really didn't. We would like to have, but we knew that it would be taken away from us and we would be low on the totem pole and get whatever was available, and that's the way it ended up.
Did you choose to be a flight engineer, or were you assigned the position?
Well, when I was inducted in June of 1943, I ended up at Presidio of Monterey, and then finally Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, and there's where they interviewed to decide, which service I would really be in. And the officers who interviewed me, suggested that I go into the Navy, and I said, I'm not going. And so they said, well, where would you like to be? And he said, well, I'd like to be in the Air Force. So they said, okay, we'll assign you to the Air Force, and also indicated that I'd like to, be an engineer, because the eventual goal was to learn as much as I could about the plane and then apply for pilot training to become a 51 pilot. And so I ended up that way in becoming an engineer.
Was it suggested that you go into the Navy because of your size?
I don't know. Probably, I would assume it could have been something like that, because when I was in basic training at Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, I was interviewed to join the Special Services because I played the saxophone. And so I remember going into the interview, and they had a saxophone there, and I picked it up and played it, and nobody was in the room with me, and finally they came out and said, well, we'd like to put you in the Special Services. Well, I'd already been with the gang in my basic training, and I just said, well, I really appreciate it, but I'd like to continue with the people I'm working with. So that was sort of a sidetrack.
Did you feel that you were well suited to being a flight engineer?
Well, yes, I worked very hard to be good at it. That was my first objective, but I also had repeating the long-range plan to prepare myself to go to flight training school. And of course that didn't happen, because it was, at that time, they gave me a 30-day leave, and at the end of the 30 days, the plan was to go to college and go through the parade. Well, when I got back to base, they decided they didn't need any pilots or navigators or bombardiers, so then they sent us on to Kingman, Arizona for gunnery training. And then after gunnery training, we went to Lincoln, Nebraska to form the crew. And from there we went to Ardmore, Oklahoma for our additional training.
What was gunnery training like?
You actually went out to the range, and they gave you the carbine, and you shot at targets. And that was, they were painted bullets so that they could tell you what they were. I wasn't a very good shot, by the way. And and then for moving, they put us in the back of pickups, and they'd shoot the clay pigeons, and I was pretty good at that. But you'd have to hang on because you were just sitting in the back of a pickup and with your shotgun and firing at these. So it was just a number of those, and of course the 45, you did the same thing with target practice and did a lot of that over and over and over again. And then you trained. We flew out of Ardmore once we got the plane and did a lot of shooting practice over the Gulf.
Now, when you were shooting the clay pigeons out of the truck, tell me what the truck was doing. Was it going around a racetrack?
Oh yeah, it's going around a racetrack, right?
Yeah, explain that. Just so your grandkids and people will know that it wasn't just, you weren't just standing in the back of a pickup truck. It was a truck. And
it was in motion, and so you had to be able to balance yourself, and at the same time, we had to depend on the person in the shack to send out the clay pigeon, and they didn't always do that. So some of the guys sometimes blasted the shack to wake them up and say, "Hey, you're not doing your job." But no, it was very critical to understand that the same in the plane that you were going to be moving, and doing evasive action, still try to hit your target. And of course, once we were assigned to the crew, we did a lot of practice with the tapes, and of course the tapes were always filed up, because the idea was to go out and do target practice with our own planes, and then go back and look at the tape. But that wasn't the best operation. Well, it was just the way the single tapes were on your tape recorder, and it took a picture of what we were doing in the plane, and if we had a target, it showed the plane that we hit it.
Were you ever able to practice on a turret with twin 50s like that which you would use on your B-17?
I don't really recall. I'm sure we did get a lot of practice in the Bendix.
What do you remember about your first B-17 flight?
Well, the first impression of the B-17 was that it really had a high odor of the fuel, which made you sick. But other than that, it was very comfortable getting adjusted to it and the flight. We were always concerned with the new pilots. The engineer always had to go out and check them out, and they didn't always have perfect landings, and so that was always a concern in the practice flights.
What were your responsibilities as a flight engineer?
Well, the flight engineer is basically responsible for the entire aircraft. So we had to do the checks on the engines. They had 24-hour checks, and you have to go in and do some mechanics, carburation, all these, and rewire again. You had to go through and check the tension on the controls and see that the flaps were working right and that it was run up properly, with the pilot. And so you had a total checkout of the aircraft every time you got into it, but in flight also. And you also, when everyone was in the plane, the engineer had to check to see everybody was connected to the intercom system, and periodically check to see how they're doing and if they have their oxygen masks on. All of those details were taken care of by the engineer. And of course, working with the pilot in running up the engines to see if the instruments were operating properly and ready for takeoff.
Now, what instruments did you monitor? Did you have to monitor oil pressure and fuel and all?
Oh yes.
Okay, go ahead and tell me.
All the oil pressure, the altitude instruments. We had to check the fuel gauges, check the pumps to see if you could transfer the fuel from one wing to another wing, and any other the other details that were our responsibility.
Were there any other aircraft systems you needed to understand?
You had to understand the landing gear, both the front and the tail system. You had to understand the whole engine capacity, the carburation that took place. All of this was necessary, as well as the controls and the fuel system and how it worked, to be sure that everything was secure before we took off. So it was just a total checkout of the aircraft.
Did your crew do any emergency training together?
You know, we talked about the bailout, you know, because there was no practice in that one. They just taught you how to put the harness on and the chest pack, and that's the very locations for escaping from the plane. But that was pretty well the instructions there.
Tell us about your first mission.
Well, the first mission was fairly light. We were going into Linden, Germany, and I believe it was a ball bearing factory. And of course, we had to practice the corkscrew procedure of getting in the proper altitude before formation took place. We went into Linden, and I think in that was a fairly simple mission, in that we didn't really get attacked by any enemy planes. We did get some flak, a few holes in the plane, and got back okay. So it was a fairly nice first experience.
What do you remember about the cold?
Very cold, very cold. And you had to be very careful of that, because the 30,000 feet, you know, it wasn't long. So everybody was instructed, you know, not to touch anything that was metal with bare hands or anything like that, to keep himself properly protected. But everybody understood that.
Tell us about the special breakfast the flying crews had.
When you went into flight, it was just simply that you could order, you know, how you wanted your eggs, you know. It wasn't just, you know, whatever you're going to eat here. You could order, you know, and if you wanted toast, they'd give you toast. And so you just got a little special treatment. Same as when you got back from a flight, you know, they all got into to control your nerves. You could have a shot of whiskey. I never drank the whiskey. I was only 19 years old. I wasn't interested in that, but that was part of the routine, you know. And then you'd go in for debriefing, you know, and tell her what you saw and what happened. Yeah.
Tell us about your more exciting second mission.
Well, the second mission was really not planned for us. It was supposed to be a day off. And but at about 4 o'clock in the morning, we received a tap on our shoulder that we would be flying, and had been assigned to a certain aircraft for takeoff. And so we went through the routine, you know, of the chapel and getting the special breakfast, and then going out and getting the plane ready to go, doing all the engineering checks of it, getting ready to take off, because you didn't know exactly where you were going until you were up above the fog, and then you were identified where you were going to go. So that was a surprise for the pilots as well as the crew, that we were selected to go on this mission. And we were selected, of course, to be one of the lead ships in. We were a chaff ship. We didn't have any bombs on our aircraft. So we were prepared to be lead in to take care of whoever was following. Chaff is, if you looked at the chewing gum wrapper, which was the foil, well, that was the reason you lost the foil in the chewing gum, because it was needed for strips, put in the strips and bundled as chaff, and it was thrown out by the crew, and it scattered and disturbed the radar, so that they had to do more of a staircase shooting of hit and miss than a direct target.
How did your second mission end?
Well, we were, of course, I think we were about 33,000 feet, and the Germans were sending up the flak, and it of course was, first we saw the black stuff, and then finally we saw the fire, and so we knew it was getting very close, and then we got hit, and the ball turret was injured, Mr. Savely, who was the ball turret gunner. And then, of course, I immediately checked out to see, if everybody was okay, and at the same time working with the pilot because our engines were hit. But I went down into after checking, I went down into the navigator's station and discovered that the navigator mask had been knocked off of his face, and he was turning blue. He was flat on his back because the shrap came right through the desk where he was working. And so I got emergency oxygen to him and got him back to being okay, and then went back up to the pilot and co-pilot, and we start discussing, do we feather this engine? The carburetor's out on that, the turbo is out on that one. And so we started, feathering an engine, and then we tried to boost the pressure, and slowly 3 engines finally went out. But in the meantime, all of this was going on, and I had the old portable oxygen mask on. I went through the bomb bay into the back to see if we could get the turret gunner out of it, because he was having difficulty helping us revolving the turret so that we could open the door to get him out. So we finally got him out, and so everybody was on the alert, and we actually tried to drop the ball and got, I think, 3 screws off, but before we left we had to abandon. So while this was all going on, the pilot was in communication with some of the fighter planes, and they were trying to stay with us just in case we got attacked. And then finally they had to say goodbye. They said they had to get back, and then we made the decision that at about 8,000 feet that we better get out. And so the signal was given to evacuate the aircraft. And Bob Newsom, who was the tail gunner, was not interested in jumping out, and so they had the rest of the crew in the back of the plane had to get the cable and attach it, and then encourage him to bail out. And they said they saw his chute open, and the rest of us up front. I was up with the co-pilot by then and the pilot, and I was down in with the navigator, and the co-pilot came down, and while he was coming down, he snagged his ripcord, and his chute opened in his arms. And I said, oh my. And so he just kept it in his arms, and we opened the hatch, and he got out, and it opened. So we were lucky, and then I went out, and I assume I was followed by the navigator as well as the bombardier, and the pilot went out through the bomb bay. And so that was our ride out at 8,000 feet.
Why did you bail out when there was no onboard fire?
Our engines were damaged where we just couldn't remain at altitude, and we were losing more and more ground. And we were concerned, if you got into a flat spin, you were really in deep trouble. And so we decided you couldn't fly that beauty with one engine. And they were going out, and we had a couple of them already feathered, that it was the safest bet is to go out. And we had no idea where we were, because the navigator was, dazed and couldn't tell us, how far we were from the border and the friendly territory. So we were still quite a ways in Germany before when we bailed out.
How was the decision to bail out decided, and what was the signal?
We did it by communication. We had enough time to say, it's time for us to leave the aircraft. And so the back took care of it, and the front, we took care of that.
Were you able to complete your bomb run on Merceburg before being shot down?
Well, we got in and over the target.
Oh, okay.
And we were on our way back. Yeah, we were on our way back, and it's just that I think there were 6 of us lead, and I think all 6 of us were pretty well taken care of that day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you encounter any German fighters on that mission?
There were German fires off to the distance, and that's the way the pilots tried to stay with us. And then when they left, they didn't come after us for some reason. They just let us go. So we didn't have that action, fortunately.
Did all your crew land safely?
We bailed out, and somewhere along the line, I was hit in the forehead, and I was knocked out. I don't know whether it was flak or a bulkhead or just what took place. I often think of that, but because there was, so much flak going on around us that it's just something knocked me out. I don't know what it was. And when my chute opened, and I don't know how I opened the chute, and it popped open, it woke me up. And I had enough time to look around and see trees, which I didn't want to land in, and a lake, which I didn't want to land in. And that's about all I think about, and I hit the ground and went out again. When I woke up, the parachute was gone, and there were 3 civilians over me, talking in German, and they were looking for my gun, my .45, which fortunately I didn't have with me, because the instructions we had, don't take the .45 because the civilians were shooting, the airmen when they were still floating down their parachutes or when they got into the ground. And so they were trying to be a little fussy and mean, and they finally took me into a near house, and a lady who was quite elderly finally said to them to get away, and she put a Band-Aid on my forehead. I was happy that the lady intervened with me, because they could have just been as easy to shoot me as let me go, and for some reason she got him to back off, and then the GIs came and got me and went on through the rest of the interrogation. So that's that issue. On the tail gunner didn't show up, and the navigator, the co-pilot didn't show up for about 3 days, and the rest of us were then captured that evening, and we landed in Gießen, Germany, and they gathered us up and went on to the next step there.
What happened to the tail gunner?
He was missing in action, yeah. And to go along with that story, see, I was injured, and they finally took me, I think, to the police station and put me in the basement, and I was throwing up, and when you get pressure up, well, the blood would shoot out from my wound, and it was dirtying the floor, so they took a bucket and put it under my head. And then finally, later in the evening, they got us together, those of us that were captured, and took us, I think, to Oberzula or something like that for interrogation. And they interrogated us one at a time. And I was probably the last person that got interviewed, and they went through the general routine, wanting to know how many planes were there and crews, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, that night we ended up in solitary confinement, because they said, well, we'll get some more information from you. So we then spent some time at this Oberzula in solitary confinement.
Did you ever learn the fate of the tail gunner after the war?
No, we never found out what happened, except he was missing in action. Robert Newsom. He was out of San Francisco.
Stories from the interrogation center.
When I was captured, as I said before, I'd lost my dog tags along the way, and I just had the little medical history, when they saw my name, Scheidt, they said, well, you're German ancestry. What are you doing here? We're going to call your mom and let her know that you're fighting against us. And so that was one of the humorous parts of their concern, and it helped me, be able to speak some German for the other intern. You see, in solitary confinement, we had to take off our belts, and I'd lost my boots, and so I had the fleece-lined boots, and you had to put those outside the door. And so one morning, this is sort of the humorous part, one morning I got up and my boots were missing. And so I could speak some German. And so I really got onto the guards about, you took my good boots. And they, in a sense, apologized and said, well, they had to clear out the driveway or something, and they'll bring them back. And they did bring them back. and in the same story with the confinement, I asked them one day, I said, well, you were looking for something to do, because you just had a little cubicle that they was penned up in. Can I take the dishes from lunch, because you'd have some soup or a piece of bread? And they said, oh yeah, you can take those to the kitchen. So I went out and I helped. And while I was doing that, I saw where my ball gunner was, and I was curious about his injury. And so when I got back from the kitchen, I went over to his door and asked the guards to let me in, and they thought that was my cell. And so they allowed me in there, and Herman was not there. And so Herman finally showed up, and they got all excited about it to say, what are you doing in here? So at least I got to say hello to him, and he said, well, they're okay. And then they put me back in my cage again. Mm-hmm. This was at the Obersola interrogation center. Okay. And I was in it about 7 days. And you were taken out before the commandant, and he quizzed you, and you just told them your name, rank, and serial number. And they said, well, finally they said, well, we'll put you back in the solitary confinement a few more days, and you'll talk. And the next day, they shipped us out for Wetzlar. And so connecting back to Newsom, while we were waiting on the train station, some children came up, and they knew who I was. And they said they knew it from a picture. So somehow they had my wallet, and the kids saw it. And at that point, they explained to me that a American Air Force person had landed in the water and drowned. And I asked him, well, can you sort of describe, because I could speak some German, describe this individual, and it was a person, like good size like you. And that's as near as I could figure, well, it could have been Bob. But it was sort of interesting that these kids spotted me. And from there, you see, we went to Wetzlar, which was the distribution center for all of us. And we saw a lot of friends there.
How did you travel from the interrogation center to the POW camp?
It was by rail. The rail experience was, they put us in sort of cattle cars and loaded them up, and then took you on to Wetzlar, and then from Wetzlar we were taken by the same mode to Stettin, where Stalag Luft 4D was. In Wetzlar, it was really, I think, a one-day trip. Yeah, I don't recall spending. When we went from Wetzlar to Stettin, I think it was a two-day.
Were you ever concerned that you might be bombed or strafed by Allied planes while you were on the train?
When we were in Wetzlar, there was bombing there, and of course everybody went under the tables, and the guards disappeared. And the same thing happened when we were going from Wetzlar to Stettin for Stalag Luft 4D. There were raids, and the interesting there is they locked the cars and left us there, and they disappeared for shelters. So they didn't try to protect us at all. If we were hit, we were hit. This was in, well, this was November. So it was early December, and it was cold.
What kind of protection did you have from the cold?
At Wetzlar, we were issued, that's where the Red Cross came in and checked out, so that was sort of special for the Germans to have it look good for the Red Cross. And so we received Red Cross parcels there, and received boots there, and received uniforms and top coats, and pretty well decked out at Wetzlar, so they were very good at that point. So we were on our way to Stalag Luke 4D, and finally arrived, and we marched from the train station to the compound, and they treated us pretty good, but the crew before, they bayoneted some of the guys, but with us, I think we were just fortunate. They just took us in and assigned us to a barracks, since there were hundreds of us, and then we had, one room, and there were probably about 24 of us in the room, and we coupled up and trying to share the little bit of food we had, and it was all in the honor system. We said you can eat when you, whatever it is, but remember you have a partner and share, and so it worked out amazing, the cooperation that we had within the barracks. But as long as we stayed within, the bounds of the compound, there wasn't any problem. But if you crossed the line, well, they had the turret. They'd shoot without hesitation. And of course, as all of us didn't have enough food to go around, and that was one of the more difficult. So all of us, from time to time, would, and me particularly, I'd go through the garbage cans to see what potato peelings had a little more potato on it, to go ahead and get some nourishment on it. But we were locked up at night, and one of the things that we had to our advantage is somewhere in the compound we had a radio. That's one of the radio men probably got the parts and put it together, and so at night there was always someone designated per building with the news. And so when they'd come to your room, half of us would talk normal, because the Germans would be listening outside, and they'd give the news, and the same would be true for the other, then talking and the other, so that we pretty well were up to date on where the troops were coming in, and that assists us in morale in the compound.
Was there an organized escape committee formed in your barracks?
No, at that time, no. I had no awareness of anybody trying to escape.
How did you pass the time?
Well, most of it, there was some recreation. Most of us just, walked the compound and did our exercise that way. But I don't recall of any baseball games or anything like that.
Did you have any problems with lice or rodents in your barracks?
Well, we didn't have any bed bug problems. We had that once we got we had lice after we got on the trip, on the forced march. But there was, of course, dysentery and diarrhea, and that had a problem. So there were a sick bay, and I went to sick bay one time because I had a cold, and so I convinced them I ought to go to sick bay. And so I discovered, too, they had a little more food over in sick bay. So I was able to go over there and have a little better food. And then they said, you have to go back. So you learn these little techniques that you could take advantage of the situation.
What medical treatment did you receive for your head injury, if any?
At the Wetzlar, backtracking, at Wetzlar, an English doctor did a butterfly on it, and that took care of that, and it just healed up that way and was okay. But what the German lady did is just put a Band-Aid. Finally, when I got to Wetzlar, they did an adjustment, and it healed up okay.
Did the Red Cross ever monitor your camp or deliver Red Cross packages?
They came through, but not that I could notice. Except we got the Red Cross parcel, and when we got to the camp, the guards went through, and like I had a bottle of vitamins, and he broke those up to show me that he was tough, you know. And I said, well, you know, they're only vitamins, but he thought he had to break them, but they did most of their moderate inspection at Wetzlar, and then because that was the only Red Cross parcel we received until we went on the forced march.
Tell us about the forced march.
On February 8th of 1945, the patent was coming in, the Russians were coming in as well as the English, and they didn't want to give us up. And so they put us on the forced march, and we left camp on February 8th, 45. And that we had our full uniforms and our overcoats and a blanket. We put it in the horseshoe around, and then the Red Cross parcel stuck in between the blanket to sort of hold it there. And that was our last of the Red Cross parcels during the forced march. When we first started out, for 2 or 3 nights, I believe, we slept out in the snow, and we had quite a bit of illness, and we may even have lost one of the prisoners. But we walked about 13 miles a day, and they had the guards there and the dogs there to keep us in line to prevent. And finally, they went in and were able to talk to the farmers. And we were allowed to go in and use the barns for every night. Well, on one occasion, we got bombed in the evening, and it was probably the British, because they did the flying at night. And so there were some injuries in that, because the Germans would put the troops in the day before. They would take them out, and the next day we'd come in. And so I figured our intelligence was about 24 hours off. And so that we always had to worry about that. And while we were on the march, there were command cars, because they're being strafed. Our P-40s would be flying right near us, and we could see the pilots plain as day. And the 50 caliber Lynx, you know, falling all around us. The Germans put their command cars into us for protection. And we didn't think that was very nice.
Now, did these pilots understand that you guys were POWs?
Yes, but at one time they didn't, and because we got strafed. We were out on the march, and that they thought probably it was German, and before they realized that we were there, they strafed us. But I don't think anyone was injured on it. Everybody scattered, and that was a concern, a friendly fire on it, right?
Did your parents know you were alive and in a POW camp?
They found out on Christmas Day of '45 that I was captured. I was notified in that of a prison, right?
Were they able to communicate with you at all, or were you ever given an opportunity?
We could write a card, and they did get some cards from me, which I said, you know, I'm okay, and so that they did allow us to do that. But the march itself, you know, was grueling, and that we didn't have any food, and we had to negotiate with farmers to give us potatoes, and we try to get 2 or 3 potatoes per captured airman. And then we used their boilers, that they boiled the potatoes for the animals, and cleaned that out and used that, and then we distributed the food to the rest of the soldiers.
Do you remember how many POWs were on the march?
I would say there were over 2,000 of us on that march. It was a lot. Everybody had to stay in line and cooperate, you know, in the foods, because we often had to distribute at night. You know, it was very easy, if you were greedy, to take the next person's food. we had an incident at one of the farms where the boiler was for boiling the potatoes. There was a hen with eggs, and we promised the farmer that we would not disturb the nest. I was involved in this organization. And lo and behold, while we're distributing, a couple of the guys, 2 or 3 of them, went in and took the hen, and we caught them roasting it over a fire. Those guys were lucky to get out of that, because that ruined it for all the rest of us. And we had to apologize to the farmer that after promising that we wouldn't disturb that hen. So that was one of the unfortunate things. But the rest of the time, you had good cooperation, and as it got to near the end of the war and the travels, the guards would tell me in German that, Omar, don't try to escape. It's safer for you to stay with the group until it's all over. Because as the Germans were concentrated and pushed back, toward Berlin, they were shooting at everything. So I think they gave sound advice.
During the march, did the German guards know that the war was lost for Germany?
Well, most of them did. There was one of them when we were right at the end. He was still talking about the secret weapon, which was the jet, But most of them pretty well knew that it was a matter of time on it. Because, and we'd gone from Stalag 4D to Hanover. We were in Hanover on Easter, and that's where we all inherited lice. And they had other troops in there, and we slept in tents and straw, and we had lice for the rest of the war. Every time we took a break, you were taking off your clothes and killing the eggs and trying to capture them. It's not a good feeling.
How were you liberated?
Liberation, we were, finally that took place on May 3rd of 45, and it was an English tank crew. And we were still on the road, and I think the name of the town was Lutau, Germany. And the tanks came in, and the white flags came out of the houses. And then a lot of the guys went in and took the cars away from the Germans and started getting people organized to transport them away and back toward U.S. troops. So that was, it's interesting how that worked out. I can't give you the details, but everybody seemed to just follow the leaders, and everybody got on to Belgium, and then from Belgium to Le Havre, France, where we find it, after recuperation there, took the ship back to Newport News, Virginia.
What kind of shape were your feet in during the march?
They were cold, for one thing, pretty close to frostbite, and the knees also, because they walked a lot on cobblestones. And so the knees, at one time, they allowed me to get into a wagon for a while, because generally they sick the dogs on you if you lagged, and gave my knee a rest, and then went back to marching again. But it was just, had to keep up with the troops.
Were the wounded POWs transported in wagons, or were they shot?
If there were wounded, they took them in the wagon, yeah. No violence of that sort that I can recall.
With the war so near the end, why do you think the Germans continued to march you rather than simply release you?
The only thing they felt is probably, well, if we are released, we'll go back to our home base and come back after them again. That's the only conclusion you can draw from that, because we had no value to them. We suggested, actually, you might as well allow us to be, released at the Stalag base rather than running around Germany, because it was just wasting effort. But they had the older gentlemen, they were 70, 75, guards that I talked to.
What do you remember about your first meal after you were liberated?
Well, we had to be very careful because we all got diarrhea because the food was not used to. But that was the main discussion, in the entire time we were captured, is food and what we'd like to have. Fried potatoes, with onions and a little bacon, and ham was so it was a happy occasion to be able to do that, but you had to be careful. They said, don't eat too much too fast because you'll just have trouble. And that's the reason they kept us at La Havre for several weeks, getting the strength back. Before, I was probably around 140, and after, I was about 109. So I lost quite a bit of weight.
Were you interned with any of your crew members at the POW camp?
They separated us so that I didn't see any of my crew the entire time I was captured. At Hanover, I did see a high school friend of mine who went into the service the same time I did, and he was in prison also. I thought he'd finished his tour and went home, and there he was in Hanover. So I just was able to say hi to him, and then we were separated again. But the officers were separated, never saw them again. I never saw any members of our crew again. Till I got back in the States in 1947, I did visit with Fitzgerald, the navigator, and I visited Frank Del Marco in New York. And then about 2 years ago, I met Frank here in San Diego, but the rest of them I never contacted. I went back to college, or started college, and was busy with that, so we never communicated.
Were you able to maintain a spirit of optimism in the POW camp?
There was no question in my mind that I was going to be released. I didn't have a panic feeling or anything like that. I just figured if I behaved myself and didn't cause any problems, I'd come out okay.
What did you do after you returned to the States?
We landed at Newport News, Virginia, and then we took rail to Santa Monica. And there was a rehabilitation several months there. And so that was a rest period and getting your health back. And then from there I was assigned to Hamilton Field out of San Francisco. And then the news came that you could get an early discharge if you wanted to go to college, which I signed a paper, and so I was discharged December 8th of 45. And then in January, started my college training.
What were your thoughts regarding Truman's decision to use the atomic bomb against Japan?
We were very happy with the decision that Truman made, because we were all destined to go to B-29, and we were not interested in that. So that was our impression, that he, stopped the war, and so we were very happy. So we could then go back and join and proceed with our normal life. But when he made that decision to bomb it, it saved a lot of lives, I think. Yeah.
Why did you prefer to fly in a B-17 rather than a B-24?
I didn't want a 24.
Oh, tell me about that.
Well, too many of the kids were burned. When we got to Wetzlar, there were a lot of, airmen from the B-24, and with the hydraulic fluid, there was a lot of fire and a lot of burning, which we didn't have to worry about in the 17. So I was not interested ever in flying a 24. It was a good plane, but it had that one big flaw of you got hit and you had to fire. So hurting a lot of kids.
Did your military job as a flight engineer translate to your post-war career?
I became a chemist, and so that was one of the things I was thinking about while I was waiting to be released. And so the engineering, mechanical, wasn't that related to what I had planned to do as becoming an organic chemist. But it was identification that you had to do some hard work.
Omar passed away on October 3, 2020, at the age of 95. His humble story of valor and service to his country live on at Air Combat Journal. If you've enjoyed this video, check out my other interviews on this Air Combat Journal YouTube channel. Please subscribe to this channel. Subscribing is easy. Just click on the small subscribe button. As a subscriber, you'll get notifications each time a new video is posted. Thank you for watching, and as always, I welcome your comments. Godspeed.